Welcome to the House of Startups. Today we are talking to Stephan Peters, the MD of the International Climate Finance Accelerator. This is an organization that helps bring to life climate funds that are focused on making the world a better place for us to live in. Stephan is also a close friend on account of being an INSEAD MBA and a CFA charter holder. This gives us the opportunity to meet at events, grab a drink or four. Let's go find out what makes Stephan tick. So today we have with us Stephan Peters, Managing Director of the ICFA, Luxembourg's very own climate superhero. Stephan, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I wanted to go through a brief history of how the ICFA was founded, a little bit about what you were doing before. I know that today the ICFA has accelerated over 30 fund managers in the last 5 years. That's a significant impact that you're having on our ecosystem, on our world. Yeah, just talk us through a little bit about how it came to be founded, what you were doing before, and how your journey has been over the last 5 years.
No, happy to. So the ICFA stands for the International Climate Finance Accelerator. It's a mouthful, but we make it work. So originally it started in 2018, but it was already concepted over a year before that. It's basically a public-private partnership set up by the Luxembourg government, as well as over a dozen private parties in the Luxembourg financial services system. The idea really is to address a basic market need that a lot of them have identified. So help with emerging fund managers, those that are looking to set up their first, maybe their second fund fund, where they are struggling with a lot of administrative, financial, operational barriers. It's quite expensive, it's a very tedious and long process to get this going. It still fits within also the climate side of things. So as part of this, we're addressing the need for more climate vehicles, more climate finance leaders, as we call them, to create them, to educate them, then also help them kind of launch their fund management companies and the funds that they're actually looking to set up. That way, basically create pathways to get more capital flowing to the projects that really kind of will make the difference when we're talking about climate action.
That's incredible. That's incredible. What were you doing before, and how did you embark upon working with the ICFA?
As many people who end up in impact investing, you have to learn your skills somewhere. So I actually started originally as an aerospace engineer. Really didn't do much with that at all. Ended up working in investment banking in London, doing mergers and acquisitions. Then I moved to Dubai, where I was doing private equity investing. Mostly tech and telecom type of deals across Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And then after that, I did my MBA at INSEAD, and I basically did more advisory work after that, having my own shop in a different couple of countries. But I really kind of discovered sustainability around 7 years ago. Got interested in the topic, started exploring more, started cooperating with a couple of other consultants and advisors, and band together and learn the tricks of the trade, start investing myself in a couple of companies, smaller startups, to really make a little bit of a difference, right? There was a little bit more purpose driven behind it all. So that was how I came into sustainability. The ICFA was already set up back then, and I actually was one of the first coach and trainers as well in the program. But not until 2021 is when the ICFA was looking to build an internal team. That's when I saw the opportunity, wanted to really make even more of a difference when talking about impact investing. And that's why I jumped on board. I've now built my team as well, and it's going very well. We've this year we're seeing a lot of interest coming to us. We have a new cohort to be announced somewhere in June this year.
Cool.
And, the interest is the highest we've ever seen since the launch of the entire initiative.
That's incredible. It feels like you've been around the world, you've explored different pathways, and now you've found your little niche, something where there's purpose, where you're driven to make a difference, and you're actually doing all of that.
It's powerful when you see purpose and kind of your work coincide. I think there's a few lucky few out there who really have that matchup, and I still count myself among those, so that's good.
Yeah, the ICFA has really scaled up over the last few years. Right now, your cohort, from what I hear, is the biggest yet. Over the last few years, what have been your biggest challenges, and how did you go about addressing them? How did you overcome them to get to where you are today?
Well, you know, the program was a grand experiment in the beginning. Like, there was no type of acceleration program for fund managers. So the whole conception, both on giving non-financial support, so training and the like, while that was there were other programs that might have given, you know, some feasibility studies and capital for funds and financial instruments that would be launched, but nothing had been done combining those two into a set program that combined a lot of these benefits for specifically emerging fund managers and definitely also for climate. So in the beginning, you know, figuring out where the best thresholds are, which fund managers are going to be the more likely, which are better for acceleration versus who still need to be incubated a little bit further. That threshold, we needed some time to kind of taper that right. And along the way, that's been proven pretty well. The failure rate has reduced a little bit, and now we've got some really good successes as well. They've launched, a couple of funds have launched recently last year, and a total commitment of 300 million that they've managed to sign. So we're very proud to have, you know, helped them and mobilize that capital to get them to that point.
Brilliant. That's 300 million that would probably not have gotten here as soon as they did without you guys. So that's a very powerful narrative. And I also, in my head, when I look at your structure, I think it's still one of the more unique structures around the world. What you guys seem to have is lightning in a bottle here. You're in a field which desperately needs capital, and you're there addressing the situation, helping the world become a better place.
And it needs more, and that's also one of those objectives we have, right? We've proven this grand experiment does make sense, and there is a positive outcome. There's a lot of mobilization of capital, both on a public and private side, and blending it together. So it ultimately is a great partnership between the public and private sides to really flow more capital into climate action. So this is also something we want to scale. In the end of the day, we've got a proven concept, we've got a proven running infrastructure. Now is the time to kind of attract more capital into it and accelerate even more fund managers in the grand scheme of things.
Good stuff. So now you're working with public players, with private players, with fund managers, with the government. You're doing these trainings. I'm curious, what's the average day like in the life of Stephan Peters?
Well, it depends a bit on the flow of things, but you know, a snapshot of kind of the activities that I keep myself occupied. Right now, for instance, we have the program itself running on a yearly basis, so there's a certain amount of attention that needs to be done, either on the training or doing a matchup between the coach and a fund manager that we've selected for support. There's also obviously the selection process that goes in, so that's quite a lot of work that we do to organize it, make sure that everybody's aligned, and we actually get all the parties, the private parties actually give the training. So that's why these trainings are given by pure experts who are very knowledgeable about all the aspects that come into launching a fund, managing a fund, and also reporting on impact and dealing with the regulations around all of this as well. So we try to kind of coordinate all this together, and that requires a bit of attention on a daily basis. Aside from that, because we are also funded by public entities, we are an audited entity, so there's quite a bit of admin to do as well. Make sure that we, you know, the contracts have to be, you know, spotted perfectly. We have a lot of tracking as well in place on the financial side of things. And on top of that, we are now still developing our own impact framework as well. So we want to report very clearly on, you know, what is the benefit that we're doing from an impact point of view. Right? We have a lot of educational activities, but then the financial support, what is really starting there? What is the financial amplifier that we see there? But ultimately, when these funds start to have capital that they're deploying into the projects, they're starting to mitigate greenhouse gases or help populations deal with climate adaptation side of things. then we want to also make sure that we can report on that clearly and transparently. So there's quite a bit of work that comes into dealing with impact investing in general. I have to be very honest.
You're a busy man.
It keeps you busy, but I've got a good team as well. So all the kudos also to them.
So how did Luxembourg happen? Like, what brought you here? How has your experience in Luxembourg been so far?
Oh, my family goes back a little while already in Luxembourg. My parents and one of my siblings landed here almost 17 years ago. So even while I was gallivanting around the world, I could still come back here, enjoy Christmas or Easter or other type of holidays along the way. But then essentially 7 years ago, I wanted to land in Europe, essentially, be back here. So Luxembourg was the natural landing spot for me.
Fantastic. And how do you envision this relationship that you have with Luxembourg? How do you see, what part do you see this taking in the near future, in the next 5 years, 10 years? Do you see yourself growing here with the ICFA? I know you're doing a lot of work outside of the ICFA as well. You're involved with the L-ban. How do you envision your partnership with Luxembourg going through?
Well, that's funny that you say that, because this is essentially, when I landed here, I didn't want to just be, this is the place that I want to work. So I did indeed start engaging with a lot of pro bono initiatives. So L-ban was one of them. I also, I'm a business mentor at the Business Mentoring Luxembourg initiative. Got active obviously a little bit in the CFA society, the inside alumni groups as well. So there's a lot of activities where you can kind of mesh in and intermix. And I think that's also something that I still want to continue, right? I think the ICFA, there's still plenty of work to be done, and there's still a challenge to scale this up, maximize the impact that we're actually seeing in the initiative. And Luxembourg is a great launching pad for that. I think just thinking about Luxembourg, the ecosystem, it's extremely supportive from that point of view. There's a lot of good, people like to work together. They understand as well that, we can't do all this together. We need to do this together because nothing really moves in that sense. So there's a lot of good initiatives here. There's stakeholder assemblies bringing people in impact investing in general and sustainability together to discuss, to, intuit, find new solutions, think around these things. So it's really good to have this, vibrant ecosystem around.
It's admirable that you're so active in so many different facets of Luxembourg life. I think it gives you a very unique vantage point across not just the mentorship thing, but investors, the business angels thing, and your associations with all of these organizations. Given this unique vantage point that you have, can I ask you to shed some light on where you think Luxembourg's strengths lie and what we can do to enhance Luxembourg as a hub for business? And in the same breath, I'm going to ask you, where do you think we can do better? What can we do better to increase the attractiveness of Luxembourg as a hub to attract talent?
So if you're talking about Luxembourg, I mean, it's a bit of a success story if you look through the history, right? We had a bit of concentration around the mining, and then the financial services, specifically fund services, was a great niche to build up that is obviously a major impact already on the Luxembourg ecosystem. And I think that's sort of the playbook that we're already seeing. Like, leveraging the strengths that you have is the best way to go, right? Luxembourg is a small country. Let's be very honest with that. But that doesn't mean that you can still have a meaningful impact on the initiative that you do. So if you're looking at space tech, for instance, right now, again, it was a bit of a gamble to go for, okay, let's go out with a bang and say, look, Luxembourg, one of the centers for space tech. Yeah. But if you look now at the initiatives that are based here and that are running here, it actually did pay off in a sense. So, and I think that's brilliant, because I think that's brilliant because you need to place sort of targeted bets, both on where your competences are and where there's opportunities. And I think Luxembourg has been very good at this and is very smart in managing and thinking around these topics. So I think, honestly, looking at sustainability and looking at, say, for instance, climate finance, I think this is definitely something that Luxembourg can also build out and really put a meaningful bet on. Let's put it this way.
No, I hear you. Given this ecosystem that we have, how do you see ICFA transitioning in Luxembourg? How do you see its relationship with Luxembourg evolving over the years?
Well, we're already deeply embedded with a lot of the initiatives, right? But I think one of the ways that the ICFA can also kind of help a bit further is go a bit beyond the borders. We're very well embedded into the Luxembourg ecosystem. One of the things that we're doing with the ICFA as well is actually let's bring more parties to Luxembourg. So, for instance, with the ICFA, we're setting up a repeat of the event we had in May, where we're trying to bring big developmental financial institutions, fund of funds into Luxembourg, give them exposure to what is happening within Luxembourg, be inspired, maybe collaborate, and actually get people to think and connect and see what Luxembourg is about a little bit as well. And I think because we are the international kind of finance accelerator, so putting a bit more emphasis on the international, I think bringing people to Luxembourg would be one of the things that I feel is an added value that the ICFA can definitely bring.
Yeah, and I think the work that you're doing, I mean, you're creating so much goodness in the world. You're essentially saving our planet. So, the more vantage points you have to do that, the better.
Exactly, and we're prime positioned, right? If I look at the fund managers that we've supported so far, we're talking about around half to 60% are targeting to deploy capital in Africa. Very much needed, especially from a climate perspective. A big chunk of it is going to Asia, another smaller chunk is going to Latin America. So there's definitely a lot of aspects that we can kind of bring and a lot of perspectives that we can bring from there to here. And I think Luxembourg is a great landing spot for anybody looking to enter into Europe anyways.
Yeah, I can tell from experience. Luxembourg, the government, the state has been, instrumental in the conceptualization and running of the ICFA. Relative to the rest of the world, like how's Luxembourg doing in terms of its initiatives with climate change and how is it positioned relative to other countries? Are we a front runner? Are the areas where we should do better?
Ooh, loaded question there, huh? So I think you always have to recognize the starting point where a lot of countries come from, because it's not easy to transition from one side to the other side on an economic basis. And I think from that perspective, if I'm looking at what the Luxembourg government is doing, they're doing a very good job at managing that to a certain degree, right? Obviously, we can always say there should be more some initiatives might not work, but in the end of the day, I think they're very clearly targeted and saying we need to transition because there's a clear need for this.
Sure.
If we're then looking at what Luxembourg is doing on an international stage, I think they are definitely one of the more front runners. They are clearly putting themselves and saying, we need to push the agenda, we need this transition happening. Right? So if we're talking about, for instance, what's happening at COP in Glasgow, Luxembourg was together with Madagascar dealing with the losses and damages discussion at that point in time, although informally at that point in time, and then it actually came into the agenda last year when it was in Egypt. So from that perspective, I think Luxembourg is for a small country, is greatly positioned in facilitating these discussions and mediating between the bigger parties.
Speaking of COP, you were at the COP, you were at Sharm el-Sheikh, as part of the Luxembourg party.
Yeah.
What was your experience like?
Oh my God, so the COP is a crazy place, at least from my perspective. So it took place over about 12 days. The estimated number of attendees was somewhere between 30 and 35,000. And then essentially if you go in there, you've got all these pavilions running as well. And each pavilion has something like 4 or 5 presentations, and there's something like 60 pavilions. So this is by far the biggest conference you can ever go to on climate. So brilliant to be there. A bit overwhelming, to be fairly honest. And I've been to conferences, but this was still beyond the scale and kind of the high level conversations that you have there are quite inspiring, I would actually say, and very educational as well. But the key is, of course, that, the COP, first and foremost, is always a gathering of the policymakers.
Yeah.
And that's where everybody's really paying the attention to what's happening there, what discussions are happening, which countries are pushing which kind of points. So I think Egypt was definitely, it had some breakthroughs, but there's still much more work to be done, obviously.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned, the loss and damages, the fund that was announced was a major breakthrough as well, in the sense that it becomes one of those the third pillar in that a lot of the countries are looking for. Because you've got obviously the investment into mitigation, reducing greenhouse gases. Yeah. There's the climate adaptation angle. Yeah. So we need to get ready for the damages that might be caused by climate and prepare for them. Yeah. And then for the ones that we couldn't prepare for, that's where the losses and damages come in play. So it completes the set in a sense, but there's still work to be done on specifically adaptation and the loss and damages.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about the developments that came out of the last COP, and I'm waiting to see how they manifest into reality. So fingers crossed for all of that.
It's a multi-year process, but I'm hopeful that we'll keep moving the agenda, and we'll get to a point where we basically have a complete set to actually deal with climate action, and that hopefully more capital will flow in all these areas, so that people who are struggling with climate damage or anything else either get compensation, they'll be helped to adjust to the climate they're dealing with. Like think about smallholder farmers being able to actually still live off the land despite having to deal with either floods or droughts. And at the same point, we need to bring those greenhouse gases down. Yeah. Not just the output, but also the absolute level. So.
For the ICFA as well, being at the COP, you representing the ICFA at the COP, it must help in your expansion plans and having a wider net and doing greater good for more than just Luxembourg, doing greater good for other parts of the world. It must help you in the expansion plans. Yeah,
so being at COP helped us really connect with a lot of key decision makers. So it's not just the policymakers, but there's a lot of the other asset managers, there's fund of funds, there's foundations. Linking up with them and explaining what the ICFA does, seeing if we collaborate with them, it definitely helps for us to kind of see if we can scale, if we can kind of pull more parties in, or even just inspire them to set up programs like ours. Because I think this is also really good to see more and more of these other types of programs pop up here and there. Because we're just focused on climate. But there's a lot of other issues out there that can really use this Accelerator program just like this one.
Sure. No, I hear you. If taking a step back, just looking at the ESG industry as a whole, where are we in its life cycle? And are there any large avenues of improvement? Are there any specific areas where you think we could do better?
Well, it's an interesting question, because obviously we've seen some backlash against the ESG industry in general. I think it's going to be basically by default, you will have to have ESG ratings. You'll have to have proper reporting that is, clearly in your sector with the material that are material for your sector as well. So I'm seeing that there will be an ebb and flow. We'll see what's happening, but ultimately I think it's going to be such a baseline need that really, if you want to have any impact on environmental, social, governance, there's only a couple of real pillars that I see happening. Like one is you will need to become an advocate in actually pushing and giving an opinion on what the companies are doing that you have in your portfolio, instead of just rating them. The investment doesn't work. That is clearly the case. So you will need to start actually using your voice as a shareholder, as a bondholder. That's where we need to go to. For those that maybe cannot do that, then you're talking about impact investing.
Yeah.
You need to invest into projects where it's clear by default that they are having an impact.
Yeah.
Either in the environmental, social, both.
Yeah.
I would actually say both, because I don't think the two are it's possible to untie them, essentially.
Sure.
And it all needs to be in a very transparent, well-governed manner.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we ultimately have to go to. And I think those are the two strategies that can only work in the long run.
Yeah. So engagement if you can, but then if you can't, then try to invest in good avenues.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to touch upon something that you mentioned about. You spoke about ratings, and I'm trying to reconcile. You hear a lot about how we rate our companies. I'm trying to reconcile. You have an Exxon Mobil that's ranked in the top 10 in most ESG rankings, and then you have Tesla that usually doesn't even feature in those. How do we reconcile that?
Well, this is exactly why I'm saying that the ESG investing type of thing is not going to be useful in the long run.
Yeah.
The ESG ratings are proxies based on imperfect information, because many of these companies either don't report on material things where you can actually say, yes, they are having a good impact, and second of all, you can't credit, you don't have a certification, you don't have verification of what they're actually claiming to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's with, for instance, the EU regulation on CSDR, Sustainability Disclosure Regulation. I think that's going to shift. A lot more reporting is going to come out there, and we'll see the fallout of that as well, where some of those highly rated companies might all of a sudden drop very fast because they now have to report. They're forced to report on the metrics that actually matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I think ratings in general is an imperfect tool that unfortunately was the only thing that was available. But I think going forward, we're going to see a lot more kind of deeper analysis, and there's a lot more transparency that's going to come from this.
That makes complete sense. Yes. Yes.
I know a lot of investment managers who use multiple rating systems and complement it with their own information because they couldn't reconcile it themselves as well.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm thinking that we're going to get to just pure good governance on the reporting is key.
I think it's an evolving industry, and I think as you go through the life cycle, these things will probably only get better, like it did with the investment industry or the finance industry.
Yeah, and as we go more standardization as well, right? I mean, financial reporting has a long history and a very standardized method where we have the, generally accepted accounting principles, for instance, and IFRS. On the impact side or on the sustainability side, we're getting there as well, but it's taking a while. But once we get there, you'll see that people will have to start reporting very clearly on everything. But then the investors can still choose what they want to do with that information as well, right?
Makes sense. Cool. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it up a notch, make the question slightly harder. I'm taking you into our rapid fire round where I'm going to ask you, I'm going to pose a juxtaposition between two options, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to answer. Pick one based on how you're feeling at the moment.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. Bitterballen versus Grompakishische.
So I can get the Luxembourgish delicacies every day, so I'm going to have to go with bitterballen because I just can't find it regularly.
All right, a slightly more challenging one. Belgian beer versus German beer.
Obviously Belgian beer. I grew up in Belgium, so...
Okay, that's a disclaimer.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take it up a notch. Would you rather be vegan forever or give up private transport forever?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I would probably give up the private transport.
Okay, fair enough. Got to feed the tummy. Phone in the bathroom or not?
Sorry again?
Phone in the bathroom or not?
No.
No.
Just no.
All right.
Just don't.
Last question. INSEAD party or CFA party?
That's a rhetorical question. It's obviously INSEAD.
Stephan is a member of both the INSEAD and the CFA societies, which is why that question becomes a little loaded. Final question, Stephan. What piece of advice would you give to professionals who'd like to follow in your path, find a little more meaning in their careers, and transition into the world of climate change?
Well, it's easier said than done. I think if you're looking at sustainability, you have to really start looking at this as a specialization. Yeah. It's a deep field once you start reading, you only realize how much more you still have to learn along the way and how everything ties together. So I think, first of all, I mean, start reading up as much as you can, trying to understand how it, how it works in your industry in general and everything else, and then figure out, can you incorporate this in your work? Are there bits and pieces that you might be able to kind of push and influence maybe at your work? But at the same point, you can also look outside of work. There's a lot of pro bono type of engagements that you can do. You can work with, you can mentor startup entrepreneurs, for instance, who are looking at sustainability or doing specific actions there. So I think just getting into the field, learn as much as you can, but also start practicing. I think the both work always very well hand in hand, because I think getting that exposure and understanding how people deal with it will give you something a little bit more tangible than just reading an article on, what's happening in the field. As you go along, I think, keep an eye on the opportunities as well. I think there is more and more opportunities around sustainability. I think a lot of corporates are moving to it. I know a lot of financial institutions are moving into it. And right now, I think there's a talent gap in general. You have people like me who've been in it for multiple years. We've got a couple of veterans who've been in it for decades as well. But it's a very narrow pyramid, let's put it this way. There's a lot of people starting to move into it. So as you gain experience, you can start jumping into it at a right level. And we meet people definitely in the middle group. Anybody between 3, 4 to 6 years of experience with sustainability, that's still very much missing. And I think that's a great way to kind of also leverage previous experience, but also then leveraging in that new knowledge and kind of combining it into what you really want to do.
That's great advice, Stephan. How would you summarize that in a nutshell for our viewers?
I would say keep track, educate yourself, then try to get your hands dirty and keep an eye on the opportunities.
Super. Fantastic advice, Stephan. Thank you very, very much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you as always.
Thank you for having me. It was great, and thanks for the lovely conversation.